I'm George Galloway, and I present Kalima Horra on Almoaiad television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kalima Horra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kalima Horra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Almoaiad television. Welcome to Kalima Horra on Almoaiad television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, but discussing Yemen. Yemen is the most grievous humanitarian catastrophe in the world, but that makes it sound like a drought or a famine or a tsunami. This catastrophe is entirely man-made, and London and Washington are up to their necks in that catastrophe. The proximate cause of that catastrophe is the war being waged by the Saudi-led coalition on the poorest country in the world next door. The people of the Yemen have suffered untold damage, massive death toll. No one can count it, and not just from the bombs and the missiles either. In the wake of the war has come cholera and all kinds of epidemics, not the least of which is famine, compounded, of course, by COVID-19. Now, Saudi Arabia and its allies could not wage the war without the weapons sold to them by Western countries, preeminent amongst whom are the United States and the United Kingdom. Moreover, the Saudi-led coalition could not operate many of those weapons systems without the military cell in the command and control centres, which have been comprised of UK and US military officers. So when I say that the West is up to its neck in the disaster in Yemen, no one can gainsay it. But there are straws in the wind. President Biden didn't make many pre-election promises, but one of the promises he did make was to end US support for the Saudi-led coalition war against Yemen. Moreover, since his inauguration, one of the few leaders in the world that President Biden has not called is the royal government in Saudi Arabia. And moreover, still, it was reported just days ago that the United States would no longer deal with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, preferring to deal with his father, King Salman. This humiliating demotion for the Crown Prince was delivered not even by President Biden, but by his press secretary in a press conference in Washington, D.C. So it may be that the United States is going to change its policy towards Saudi Arabia, at least in terms of the Yemen war. But that doesn't mean the war will come to an end. After all, after the murder and dismemberment of my friend Jamal Khashoggi by the Saudi regime in Istanbul last year, it was indicated by even the Trump administration that the war in Yemen must come to an end, and they announced that it would come to an end, and it did not. So Saudi Arabia has more than enough weapons to continue the war on Yemen, and it has more than enough mercenaries at its disposal to carry out that war. So will Joe Biden's change of American heart bring the war to an end? Now, Saudi Arabia has done its very best to paint the conflict in Yemen as a proxy war against Iran. It has done its best to paint the conflict in Yemen as a sectarian one. Those of us who know the region well know that that is poppycock. But I have with me guests of absolutely impeccable credentials and distinguished in their own fields. We'll hear from them their take on the question, will Biden's attitude towards Yemen save the Saudi regime or end the killings? Dr. Halla Diyab, broadcaster, screenwriter, author, producer, and TV commentator on Middle East and North African affairs. Tell us, please, how you see the conflict in Yemen and if you think we're about to see a change in it.
Of course, there are good and bad in the decision of Biden in order to pull his troops from Yemen. But the first thing is that the first advantage is that there will be a hope for the Yemeni people, for the humanitarian aid. And also, number two is that the removal of the designation of the terrorism foreign organization, which Trump has established and credited in Yemen, which was a big obstacle to the humanitarian aid.
Just to explain that to the audience, this designation of the Houthis as foreign terrorists meant that aid organizations could not get aid through areas they control for fear of being contaminated by terrorism. Please, go ahead.
Hence, Biden, 4th of February, has decided the removal of this organization. At the same time, it kind of a change in the policy of the United States, which we know is kind more as a cowboy military intervention in the Middle Eastern region. Now, Biden is rewriting the scenario, stating that America now is up for democracy, for diplomacy, and for pushing for a peace progress. This is the good side of it. But the other side of it, how credible is America? We've seen, we know the American president through time, they give promises at the beginning of their election and things change in the Middle East. We've seen what they've done in Syria, in Libya, in Egypt, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So how come the Yemeni scenario will work with somebody very stubborn like Saudi Arabia, which we know that when they enter the war, they call it even the decisive storm, and they really promised the supporters that they will win in Yemen, and they didn't win because, as we know, that the Saudi military forces, they lack experience on the ground. They're not like the Syrian army or the Iraqi army or even the Egyptian army in ability to work on the ground despite the military weapons they have. Number two is, what about Al-Qaeda in Yemen, which is very strong in Yemen, as you know, from Anwar al-Awlaki, who immigrated or left in 2006 and has a strong hold. It's actually one of the most dangerous franchise in the Middle East of Al-Qaeda. So that doesn't mean if Biden said we will see support to Saudi in Yemen, that America will not intervene in the, in other policies, counterterrorism policy. What I mean is Al-Qaeda. And also, will that push for peace? Will that push actually for ceasefire? While Houthi will not actually surrender and the Saudi will not surrender. So that actually has a bad and good to it.
As an expert, tell me this, what do you think the impact on the Crown Prince will be to hear from the press secretary of the president that the United States will not be dealing with him anymore? After all, the Yemen war was very much MBS's baby, wasn't it?
And he was very strong ally to Trump. Trump really favors
Maybe that's the problem.
Maybe
he was so close to Trump that Biden wants to park him.
Yeah, but saying that, we know that he is very very determined and very aspiring and very kind. He wanted to rebuild Saudi Arabia. He redefined Saudi Arabia in the world with the new project that he wants to show Saudi is liberal, Saudi Arabia is progressive. And I think that he will take it on the chin because, he knows that this is a kind of, I'm not going to sit with you, I'm going to sit with your father, with your dad. And this kind of, he will find it offensive, and he's very defensive as a character, I think, reading his action on the ground. And I think that also we need to look at another perspective, despite, you know, people agree with the Saudi involvement in the region, that Saudi Arabia also is kind of reshaping the Middle East with their neon, you know, city. And that could, in a way, endanger, or like America is trying to say to the Saudi Arabia that you cannot excel as a country to become one of the promising country in the world. You have limits, and we define these limits. And I believe also we have to look at the step that Biden takes from this perspective.
Very interesting. Now, Murad Qureshi, you as a practicing politician, a long-serving and distinguished member of the London Assembly, you know all about politicians breaking their pre-election promises. Not yourself, of course, but you've seen it happen. Do you think Biden is serious about this?
Well, I think what's interesting is where we are with global opinion. When we organised with a lot of campaign organisations in Britain, in America and the Middle East on the 25th, the Monday following his inauguration, there was masses of people on social media and on the streets of the Middle East. There were several cities in Yemen where people came out in protest about the continuation of the war, and also in places like Bahrain. I think Biden is actually in step with global world opinion. And a good indication is what he has told to the butcher. Let's face it, that's what the Crown Prince is. In Saudi Arabia. I think that's an interesting move by his part. Previously at G20s, he's been given the red carpet treatment, even after all the gory details that we heard from Istanbul. And give some credit to the Turkish intelligence. They didn't need to release all that information about the gruesome details, but they did, because they were quite frankly sickened. And I think he's in tune with that. I also think there are other aspects we shouldn't forget. We are coming to a point in the global economy where we just might be moving away from our dependency on oil. Because let's face it, one of the reasons why the Americans have been in with the Saudis since World War II is getting cheap and readily available oil supplies. We may become to a point where we're more dependent on wind and wave energy supplies than we are to oil to get things running. So let's judge him by his deeds, and I think the two steps he's made already are quite intriguing. He's made them early on, and let's hope he continues them through for the rest of the term.
Now, you're part of the leadership of the Stop the War Coalition. Is it your experience that finally the Yemen issue is cutting through to the public?
It doesn't take too much to explain to some people about the issues, and people see it quite clearly. I think what we tend to have is a media that makes it much more grey than it really is, needs to be. And I think people can see, when you tell them we're actually intimately involved, not only supplying the arms, but actually operating them. Now, that sounds very foolish to me, that you sell arms, which you also need yourselves to run out there, and that's quite clearly the case. And I think that's common accepted practice. When the Americans sell their hardware to them, that's always the case. They send the manpower out. In this instance, I mean, there's quite clear difference. With the Americans saying they're going to stop the export of these arms, we've got a British government that's, for the first time in my living memory, is out of kilter with an American government.
The Americans can't stomach the war anymore, but the British are going on.
And I don't think something like this has happened since Vietnam War. Tell me if I'm right. I wasn't around at that time, but that's my reading of British history with our alliance, strategic alliance with America, and that's something which we need to emphasise with the British government, and we intend to do that on the 26th of March, which will be the anniversary of this appalling war started by Mohammed bin Salman. And we need to get through to our MPs. We need to get them to realise this is what their constituents want, and also sign early day motions, which people like Jeremy Corbyn have put down. So there is support from British public opinion, and we put the appropriate pressure to our parliamentarians and embarrass Boris Johnson and his government.
Now, Ahmed Almoaiad, you were the president of the Sheba organization for human rights in Yemen, which is a coalition of Yemeni NGOs and partners. Tell us, how is the present situation for the people in Yemen?
Actually, I will start my speech from the phrase that says, in Trump age, we were reading the politics, you know, but now in Biden age, we will read the politics and analyze the politics. The situation in Yemen is like the worst. Yeah, I mean, very bad situation now in Yemen, and we were expecting something from Biden promises when he said, in the election time, he was saying like promises that they will stop helping Saudi Arabia because of the crisis in Yemen is in a very dangerous level. But what we are seeing now is something different change. Yeah, I mean something. When we see now in the war in Yemen these days, the air jets, the F-16, the F-15, still bombing Yemen. So as we know, and everybody know that Saudi Arabia can't use the F-16 and F-15 without the direct helping from America. And as Mahathir Mohamad says in May 2020, he said, we bought F-16 just for the military show. But if we want to use it as fighting military operations, we need technology. This technology exclusively facilitated by America, and they will not, they rent it by day, to Saudi Arabia and others. So now we were expecting something new from Biden, but unfortunately, America now still in the room operation, military operations, and they're still bombing Yemen, and they're still helping Saudi Arabia. And if he was talking about the humanitarian situation, he knows that there is more than 15 oil ships detained by Saudi Arabia in the sea, across to Hodeidah port. And this detained affect the health system in Yemen, water, electricity, deeply, There's a big crisis now, these days in Yemen. And if anyone wants to talk about the humanitarian situation, he has to start with this, not with some words. So Biden now is playing a game, like political games. He wants just to sell words with Iran, with Yemen. And in Yemen, he said, okay, we will remove Ansarullah from the terror list. And he is expecting now them to do reaction for this. He wanted to achieve something he was, or America or Saudi Arabia was trying to achieve it with a war 6 years, and they couldn't. And now he wants to take it by words. Yeah.
Well, talking of words, let's hear from one of the grand old men of English words. Peter Oborne is one of the country's most prominent journalists and authors and commentators. In fact, he's got a hot-selling book out at the moment about the lies of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump. Peter, welcome.
Thank you.
Peter, you traveled to Yemen in 2016 and you've followed the war ever since. Do you think there's any justification for the US and the UK to continue their involvement in this war?
Well, the UK is the penholder at the United Nations for the Yemen. So you would have hoped, I would have hoped, that the Britain would have taken very serious steps to hold the Saudi government accountable for war crimes. I've seen no sign of that happen, and playing a creative role in ending probably the greatest humanitarian calamity of the 21st century so far. But I've seen no evidence of Britain or America until the arrival of Joe Biden. He's made some very interesting remarks, the new US president, about bringing the war to an end. This is very welcome.
Is President Biden's latest comments, are they a real change in American foreign policy, or is this just words, just cosmetics?
It will send out an enormous symbolic statement if Mr. Biden says that he's seeking to supply arms to Saudi Arabia, which can be used to kill Yemeni civilians. He's going to send. He could say that he doesn't support. This war belongs really to Mohammed bin Salman. He does not support Mr. bin Salman. There have been terrible atrocities. It's not just this war, remember, to remember the barbarity of the killing of Jamal Khashoggi. And I've brought with me, I think it's important to quote it, what Joe Biden said in November 2019 when he was running for the Democratic nomination. Khashoggi was murdered and dismembered at the orders of the Crown Prince. We are going to make them pay the price and make them the pariahs that they are. That is what the US president said in 2019. Now, if he goes ahead and does that, he will bring a halt to the fighting very quickly.
Is President Biden's latest comments, are they a real change in American foreign policy, or is this just words, just cosmetics?
Well, you do see different language, don't you, coming from Tony Blinken, Secretary of State Blinken, than you do from the US president. And of course, there's a long history of US presidents making strong statements about Saudi Arabia and then failing to act on them once they become president and get spoken at by the security establishment and so on.
Does the removal of Ansar Allah, of the Houthis from the so-called terrorist list, does that really mean anything?
I saw it as extremely welcome. I mean, you have to understand that there is something dreadful going on in humanitarian terms. I think the forecasts are 2 to 3 million to be starving this year. And these sanctions, the targeting the Houthis as a terrorist group, made it much more difficult to deal. They control large areas of Yemen. There's no sign they're losing control of large areas, and it makes them impossible to look after the interests of the people. I have to say also that I am out of date, but when I was in Sana'a and in the north 4 years ago, you know, the Houthis were popular because they were defending their country against what was seen as a barbaric attack.
Can you see the British government halting the exports of arms to Saudi Arabia?
And that's a very dark moment in British foreign policy, I'm afraid. And I'm sure pressure will now start to grow on the UK government. Particularly, that is another reason why Mr. Biden's remarks are very welcome, because they create a change of atmosphere.
And finally, will the UK at least stop cooperating in the airstrikes on Yemen?
I don't think that the British media has done nearly enough to highlight the terrible things which are happening in the Yemen, and also British complicity in a great deal of this through the Saudis. It has to be said, it is extremely hard to get to. I've been trying endlessly to get back into Yemen to report what is going on in a fair-minded and truthful way. It's been very hard, partly because it's just dangerous, but also because you need the right visas and the right permits, and the Saudis control most of that, and it's been very hard.
Much more coming up after the break. Stay tuned. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Almoaiad television, coming from London, talking about Yemen. Murad Qureshi, you are, as I said, a member of the London Assembly. You are deeply involved in Labour Party politics. There are many Muslims, most Muslims, support Labour. There are many Muslim members of Parliament who are Labour members of Parliament. But there's almost complete, if not complete, silence from them on the issue of Yemen? How do you compute that?
I have noticed that myself, and I've wondered what the explanation is. I suspect the Saudis have got through to them in some way, and the only way I think possibly may be that once you've been sent to Hajj by the Saudis, it's not considered polite.
The old gold watch gift.
Well, I'm not suggesting gold watches here, but I mean I'm talking about religious holidays here.
Although it would be worth
Yeah.
checking the members' register for watches.
I mean, look. I mean, I personally, it's not the kind of thing I would do if it was offered. If you want to influence me, you send me to a World Cup football tournament or something like this. But you know, I think there are things like this in play, George, which I don't think we've got to the bottom of. Is what I'm saying.
I think that is right. It's the dog that didn't bark. It's the shoe that didn't drop. But there is another possible explanation. Not sure if it's a better one or a worse one. The Saudis have attempted from the beginning to make this a sectarian issue. Yeah. They have pretended that the Yemenis are Shiite when they are in fact Zaidi, which is neither Sunni nor Shia. They have pretended that the war is between Iran and Saudi Arabia rather than Saudi Arabia and the people of Yemen. Is it possible that Muslims in Britain, including Muslim parliamentarians, have been infected by this sectarian story?
There's no doubt that I mean, I personally find myself in London where you've got Muslims of all sorts, Sunni, Shia, and others as well, Ismailis and Ahmadis and what have you. I would suggest that no one gets involved in those discourses, but clearly some people have. And it's very unfortunate. I don't think it's going to help at all the real living circumstances of most Muslims in the United Kingdom by getting involved in those debates. I think we're in a better position trying to improve everyone's living standards, not only here, and also having a foreign policy which is anti-war, particularly in the Middle East, given we're also coming, this is the 10th anniversary of the Arab Rising. And look what we've got for it. We've got the same regimes basically in power, with if more power than ever. And as for the Saudis in London, I mean, as a Londoner, one of the regular things I do is check up on diplomats and who's paying their congestion charge and parking tickets. Well, I can tell you one of the worst offenders are. It's the Saudi embassy in Mayfair.
Not quite as bad as the United States of America. Let's cross over to the United States and talk with Yusuf Mauri, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, journalist, and storyteller.
It's good to be here.
Yusuf, you're in the United States, so tell me, have you seen any change in the attitudes in the United States towards Yemen, towards Saudi Arabia
Not really.
in recent days?
You don't see that. There's some cosmetic changes, and of course that's been the cornerstone of U.S. policy in the Middle East for many years. The move by this administration to remove Ansar Allah from the terrorist list was not genuine. If Biden wants to get any credit, if this U.S. administration wants any credit, wants people to look up to it, then the first thing that they need to do is take this matter very seriously. And what the first thing they need to do is lift the blockade that is resulting into the starvation of hundreds of thousands of Yemenis. That's the first genuine move that they need to take. They also need to call Saudi Arabia, the Saudi Crown Prince, and they need to tell them to end this bombardment and the war that has continued for over 6 years. Yemenis are living in a state of chaos. They're living in the world's biggest prison. They cannot escape the situation. People, families, they go to sleep at night and they have to worry about their homes imploding on top of them because an airstrike landed on it. And that's the reality for tens of thousands of Yemenis who have died by the airstrikes that landed on their homes, landed in residential areas.
Do you think the American government can afford to ignore the huge profit that lies in the United States arms sales to Saudi Arabia?
Well, listen, George, I think for the most part, the Muslim world has been fooled. And all of these politicians and most of these commentators and these journalists who cover the war, they're being fooled. And you have to start questioning why does this propaganda exist? Why this farrago of misrepresentation, lies that continue to spread across the world, painting the war for what it's really not. They want you to believe that what's happening in Yemen is a war against a quote unquote Houthi Iranian militias that have overthrown the quote legit government of Yemen, and now the West and Saudi Arabia are helping the Yemeni people get rid of the Shias, the Shia takeover, as they like to portray. That's not the reality on the ground. The fact of the matter is, the Yemeni people, they want the right to rule their own future. They want to have a say-so on how their country is going to be governed.
As an American citizen of Yemeni origins, how easy is it for you to travel between the United States and Yemen?
Well, it's like many other journalists in my position. There's that threat of traveling to Yemen through coalition areas controlled by the Hadi government, areas controlled by the coalition, and we face the threat of being detained and imprisoned. And the reason is because we choose to speak the truth to what's really happening on the ground. We're not pro Saudi, we're not pro Houthi, we're not pro Ansar Allah. We're just speaking the facts. And the fact is, in Yemen, this war is continuing because the U.S. wants to secure its puppet regime. So for us commentators or analysts or journalists who choose to do these interviews, and we speak the truth and we tell you that what's happening in Yemen is not a Shia takeover. It is not overthrow of a legit Yemeni government.
Do you feel that we're getting any closer to the end of this war and the atrocities?
The U.S. new policy, which says that the U.S. will no longer support Saudi Arabia militarily, and this doesn't really mean anything, because the U.S. has already sold $60 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. Okay, they've already sold them all those weapons. So it doesn't really do any good for Biden to come out now, after the fact that Saudi Arabia has gotten all those weapons, and to say we're no longer going to sell them any weapons. It doesn't make any sense. Why? Or it won't have any impact because you've already gave Saudi Arabia all those weapons. And it doesn't look like the Ansar Allah movement is going to lay down their arms anytime soon and to give in to the demands of Saudi Arabia. If we look at what's happening on the ground, we can see that the Ansar Allah movement, they're winning the battle on the ground. They're taking over key strategic military sites and provinces which were controlled by the coalition forces. And the Ansar Allah movement is continuing to advance. Look, the fact of the matter is, Ansar Allah doesn't need to negotiate right now because they actually have the upper hand.
Ahmed, it's quite telling that Murad Qureshi and Peter Oborne, the two British people on the panel, have both got some confidence, some optimism, some faith maybe in Joe Biden's bona fides in this regard. But the two Yemenis that have spoken, yourself and our friend in the United States, both think it's not worth the paper it isn't written on. Explain.
Actually, we have very bad experience with the American policy in the Middle East, even in Iraq, in Syria, in other countries, especially in Yemen. We are the neighbor of Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia proved that it's the arm of the America in the region. So they don't treat us like neighbors. They treat us like third, fourth level of people. This is the first one. The second one, they just want to control Yemen as they want, not like good neighbor or common interest between us. And the war from March 2015, launched by Saudi Arabia, and the announcement was from Washington, from Adel Jubeir. And he said, we were preparing this war 6 months ago. 6 months ago means 21st of September 2014, when Ansar Allah and its allies came to Sana'a and took over Sana'a peacefully, and they make agreement, the peace and the cooperative and peace agreements supervised by the UN. And they did not kill anyone, they didn't detain anyone, so it was like a Yemeni agreement. Saudi Arabia refused this because it will replace the Gulf Initiative. So Now we don't trust Saudi Arabia, we don't trust any American president because they had so much opportunities to show their good intention against Yemen, but they didn't. Now Biden, before he became a president, he said we will let them pay the price and we will isolate Saudi Arabia regime. Okay, we were expecting something new. Okay, Biden will come and he see that its project in the region is losing now. So he will make some change. And now he's still helping Saudi Arabia.
It's pretty early. He's only been president for a few weeks. Aren't you being a bit impatient?
Okay, look, 1 month for us is good, but 1 month for people suffering from poverty and under the fire, it's long time. And now they are suffering from the food. If we can find tea and coffee and they see this is like something big, they wish to achieve, to reach it. And now they have big crisis in electricity, in water. More than 1,200 trucks in Hodeidah ports looking for fuel to spread the food and other stuff to the provinces. And America see that, and Saudi Arabia see that. All the world see this, but they will not help Yemeni people in this issue. They want just to stop you to go to Marib, because in Marib you will find the oil there, so you'll help yourself without the ships they detain in the sea. So now they feel worried and they will get sick, because you try to get your oil, your people oil in Marib. So they will not worry if you feel hungry, if there are many people, feel hungry or get in or live in a disaster or in a very bad situation, they will not get worried. Even Martin Griffith or the UN or anyone else, or Biden as well.
Dr. Halla.
I want to say that also Biden said, despite that he is going to take the troops out of Yemen, he said that we are going to protect Saudi Arabia borders. We are going also to make sure the shipping routes, especially Bab al-Mandeb, which is a very vital, place for the shipping, is safe. So actually, there is a step out of Yemen, but still America will have a step inside Yemen. And another thing I want to say, the hypocrisy of the West in dealing with the Middle Eastern crisis, because it seems like the suffering of the Yemeni people doesn't matter. We don't see response to the humanitarian problems. We don't see funding. We don't see much charity. We don't see much adverts on television. We don't see much people, celebrities talking about the suffering in Yemen. But when it happens in Syria, it seems that it was different. Because maybe that we have to look underlying problems that the West have with the Middle East. Despite that they say, they sugarcoat it and they say it's a civil war, it's between Shia and Sunni, but these Shia and Sunni are part and parcel of the Middle East. We cannot go and, ignore that. Houthi are part and parcels of the Yemeni societies. And I think that they lived for years, for decades, side by side. Why now it's a problem? Why it's a problem now? There is civil war in Syria, civil war in Libya. It seems that America is just finding allies in Middle East, like what happened in Saudi Arabia. They come, destroy these countries, like Yemen, Libya, Syria, and move on to another target. And that's why we should not buy what America say, but also we need to bear the responsibility of the Arab Muslim countries, in all the Middle East, that seems to just look at the suffering. The Yemeni children, despite whatever religion, whatever loyalty, whatever affiliation their families have, they have right to go to school. They have right to celebrate Eid, and they have right to eat chocolate and cakes. That is what the human rights say. That's what we learn in England, what we learn in America about democracy. But it doesn't seem that democracy is actually what America and the West is doing in the Middle East.
Well, when it comes to the Arab world, the blood of some people is more valuable than the blood of others. Let's hear from Simon Hill, who's a peace activist, a writer and an author, and is the campaigns manager at Peace Pledge Union. Simon.
Thank you.
Simon, let me read your pledge, which is, war is a crime against humanity. I renounce war, and am therefore determined not to support any kind of war. I am also determined to work for the removal of all causes of war. That's the Peace Pledge Union pledge. So what have you done in the UK to stop our country arming Saudi Arabia?
Well, at the Peace Pledge Union, we've been working with other peace groups such as Campaign Against Arms Trade and other groups within the UK, but also internationally through War Resisters International, of which we're the British section, and trying to build links with groups in Yemen and as well as in the US and elsewhere. And ending arms sales has always been important to us. And the Peace Pledge Union was set up in the 1930s. Our predecessors then were calling for an end to British arms sales to Mussolini's Italy. And clearly, when somebody makes profit from something, it becomes more likely. If somebody profits from war, if those with power profit from war, war becomes more likely. And we've seen the US and the UK in particular, other countries too, but especially the US and the UK, sell weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, bombing civilians in Yemen. And so we've sought to tackle that in various ways, working with our comrades in the Campaign Against Arms Trade and others to lobby MPs in Britain. But we've also, I'm pleased to say, our members have at times taken non-violent direct action. So 2 of our members in 2017 entered the BAE Systems factory in Lancashire, BAE Wharton, and attempted to disarm warplanes bound for Saudi Arabia. Now, they were stopped and arrested before they could. But also many of us have sought to impede the arms fair that happens in London, blocking access to it and so on. I was arrested there the year before last, along with many others. So there's that sort of entirely non-violent direct action, but also we've sought to lobby the government. We've sought to build links with groups in Yemen, such as the Watana Center for Human Rights. And of course, we've worked with our comrades around the world, including people in the US who have worked so hard to reach a point where Joe Biden is at least saying that he will end US arms sales that will help the Saudi bombing.
Has Biden really changed American policy towards the war in Yemen? Will this have any real impact?
Well, I have no illusions about Joe Biden. Joe Biden was working with Barack Obama when Obama was happily selling weapons to Saudi Arabia when the bombing of Yemen started in 2015. The fact that Joe Biden has said this at all is an example of the grassroots movements in the US and internationally that have worked against the war in Yemen. It's an example of their nonviolent power.
And finally, will the change of policy announced at least by President Biden affect Britain's involvement in the war?
It's interesting. UK governments have a tendency to be very subservient to the US when it comes to foreign policy, as you know. I think UK governments are far too subservient to the US. Ironically, we've now got a situation where the US government may be more progressive on something than the UK government. However, the arms industry has massive influence in the UK. The former British Foreign Secretary, Robin Cook, famously said that the chairman of BAE Systems had the key to the garden door at number 10 Downing Street. Whatever view you take of Robin Cook, I think he assessed that pretty accurately. So I think there is a good chance that the UK could follow the US lead if Biden really does do what he's promised. But that will only happen if we keep up the pressure. That will only happen if we keep speaking out at the grassroots in Britain, and if people around the world continue to put the pressure on Boris Johnson, knowing that the British people on the whole don't support arms sales to Saudi Arabia.
Simon Hill, a British hero. We can blame the US. We can blame the UK. They are providing the wherewithal, but the killing is being carried out by Arabs and Muslims. in Islam, your neighbor is not just the person next door, but I forget, 25 or 30 houses away. Who are these coalition members? Saudi Arabia, are the rest just fig leaves? And how do they sleep at night, knowing what we know and they must know of the suffering that the Yemeni people are undergoing? Who are the other people in the coalition?
Actually, this is a good question. You know, as Dr. Halla said, she mentioned Anwar al-Awlaqi. Now, Anwar al-Awlaqi is covered now. No one mentioned it in Yemen. In Yemen, there is a Tura Bora. In Afghanistan, there is Tura Bora. We have Tura Bora in Yemen called Yakla and Qaifa. This is names of villages. This village established, or the Al-Qaeda and Anwar al-Awlaqi established its camps and schools and universities for Al-Qaeda in this, I think, 30 years ago. And the government in Saleh, you know, in Saleh, they couldn't go or enter in this village or mountains. And Ansarullah and the Jaysh al-Yemeni, the Yemeni army, 7 months ago, they defeated them. They completely kicked them out from all of these mountains. And the Al-Qaeda and these members now went to Marib. And there is no problems between Hadi government and these members of Al-Qaeda. They just came to them, no battle, no capture, nothing. So they feel they are the same group. And now, when you hear in the media of them, you just, if you remember, if you come back to the 18th, when the Al-Qaeda was fighting Soviet, the same tune, the same words, the same appearance, the same everything, they are fighting against Sana'a government. So these groups, in their mentality, they have the Wahhabism, the same ideology, the main root of ideology, which is in Al-Qaeda, Daesh, Boko Haram, all terrorist groups in the world have this mentality and have this ideology, which has been taught in Saudi Arabia and the mosques, in their mosques, in their universities, in their schools. I born in Saudi Arabia, I live there, I know. So all of
and
this,
in the mosques around the world that they fund.
actually here in London, I found their books here. So these groups now, they're saying what they claim to gather the people to fight against Sana'a government. They are Shia, Majus. I don't know what's the meaning of Majus in English. Majus, Rawafid, you know, this sectarianism words and allegations. So they just use this to gather the people to push them to fight. Now, there is no one believe believe with Hadi government legitimacy. No one talk about legitimacy. Even there is a leader in the West Coast. He was talking with his group and said, "Look, we are not fighting about legitimacy for anyone. We are fighting about Deen Allah, the religion of Allah, like this." So, and he is covered by Emirate and the coalition. So they don't have in their mentality any politics or any legitimacy. They're just fighting because they believe that the other
They're
side
fighting
are
for their political, their religious line.
Exactly. And let me just add something. You know, in middle of November 2016, when John Kerry was two months to leave, you know, it was in his end of period. He visited Muscat and he met Mohammed Abdel Salam. He is the president of the national delegation of Sana'a. Within 2 days, they achieve an agreement from 2 points. One is ceasefire immediately, and the second one is unified government between all Yemeni parties. And Mohammed Abdel Salam signed directly on that because Sana'a want to peace. They don't want to fight forever. But who refused it? The Hadi government and not Mohammed bin Salman and Mohammed bin Zayed. Hadi government, his foreign minister, he refused and said, "We will not make John Kerry to make a victory on our shoulders. 2 months he will leave." So they just want to fight forever. They want to just, they will not accept any government contains Ansarullah in it. So they just want puppets in there.
Last word to you, Dr. Halla. Isn't this the case that this war is about the proselytizing of this extremist, sectarian, narrow interpretation of Islam, which we find on the battlefield in Syria, we find everywhere, we find it even in your own country of Libya. That's what this is really all about, isn't it?
It is also, in addition to political interest, and also to make Yemen immerse in poverty, ignorance, extremism. And I want to go back to Al-Awaliqi and, you know, the group, the extremist group. They are letting it thrive inside Yemen, because Yemen is very stronghold for extremism. Not since Al-Awaliqi went there, and Al-Awaliqi went there in 2006 because of the tribal connection he has in Yemen. That's why they allowed him to be there in Yemen. Jihad John, who, you know, the infamous guy from London, went to Yemen and he was trained in Yemen. And when he was asked by the MI5 why he was in Yemen, he said, well, he was connected with his root because he originally from Yemen. So it is in the interest of America and the West to leave the Middle East immersed in this wave of radicalization, poverty, ignorance, or maybe, you know, in order for not to move.
Well, it might be in their interest as long as it stays over there. It's not in their interest, Murad, when it ends up on London Bridge or in the streets of Germany and France.
But it's an excuse for their presence. It's an excuse.
Yes.
If the radicalization has gone, ISIS was an excuse for, you know, coalition, for invasion, for poverty, for immigration, for destruction of national heritage, for sectarianism. And always extremism ticket is a good game for wars.
If we cut the Yemeni children, do they not bleed? Let's stop, for God's sake, the bleeding in Yemen. I've been George Galloway. This has been Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television. Thank you very much for watching.